This is a video on 4 more objections and Mill's replies. We're going to tear through the remaining 4 major objections to the GHP and Mill's answers to them fairly quickly. It will help you to follow along on the handout I've prepared. If you haven't noticed it yet, it's within Module 1.1 on Brightspace. It's called Mill Objections and Replies, and it looks like this. Notice that we've already dealt with the first objection at length in the preceding video. So now we're ready to look at the second objection, which goes to the impossibility of most people becoming happy. Mill articulates that objection, again in the voice of one of his opponents, on 2.14 and gives his answer over the next few pages. There are 2 parts to his answer. The first part, we need a realistic definition of happiness. Let's look at the top of page 215. Right? If by happiness be meant a continuity of highly pleasurable excitement, it is evident enough that this is impossible. Or we can put that in simpler words, that Mill's opponents believe that happiness is a life of continuous ecstasy, and everyone knows that's impossible. Mill's own definition of happiness is on 215, and we can break it down into 5 separate parts. Happiness is moments of intense pleasure with a small number of temporary pains, a large and diverse number of pleasures, more active than passive experience, and realistic expectations. They're all self-explanatory, except the 4th, but that's also a fairly simple point. We all hate it when our lives are outside our control. We don't want other people to choose what food we eat, where we live, what career we pursue, how we spend our free time, etc. So COVID-19 is an example of a collective experience of passivity. We're being victimized by both a virus and by what in many cases is an incompetent response to the virus on the part of many governments. Mill's point here is that someone is happy if they have more control over their lives than not. It's okay to have some experiences of passivity and loss of control if most of the time we have more control. There's still a second part of Mill's answer to the impossibility objection. That is that most of the things that cause people to be unhappy can be changed. He gives a list. The main causes of unhappiness: ignorance, poverty, disease, and bad luck. Obviously, society working together can change the first 3 of these at least. We can put into place education systems to get rid of ignorance. We can make changes to society and our economic systems that will eliminate poverty. Better hygiene, clean water, and medical advances can get rid of disease. The 4th, though, is really interesting because it sounds wrong. Bad luck is bad luck. Why would Mill say we can remove it from the world? Here's the kind of thing he's thinking of. In 2010, a 7.0 magnitude earthquake struck Haiti. Over 100,000 people were killed. The next year, in 2011, a 9.1 magnitude earthquake struck northeast of Tokyo. It caused 30-foot waves and damaged several nuclear plants. But only 20,000 people died, as opposed to the 100,000 from a much milder earthquake in Haiti the year before. Now you could say that's bad luck in both cases, but what's the difference between the 2 countries that would account for the difference in the death toll? Well, Japan has very strict building codes. Haiti has no national building codes. That's not bad luck, it's bad government. So Mill's point is, with better laws and social structures, a lot of so-called bad luck can be avoided. Maybe not all of it, but Mill thinks most of it can. The 3rd, 4th, and fifth objections are much easier. You can trace the quotations on the handout if you like. I'll summarize them for you here. Most of us think that it's highly ethical for someone to sacrifice their own happiness for the happiness of someone else. And some people even choose to sacrifice their lives for others. So Mill asks, again, in the voice of an opponent, why doesn't this contradict the GHP? Why doesn't self-sacrifice and our admiration for self-sacrifice contradict the GHP? Mill's answer is that there are two types of self-sacrifice, one of which is wrong and the other of which is ethical, but not really self-sacrifice and not really an exception to the GHP. Self-sacrifice that doesn't increase someone else's happiness is wrong under the GHP. We should not admire it, because if we subtract something from our own happiness and we don't add some other happiness to the world, then we've diminished the overall happiness of humanity. Okay? So that example of self-sacrifice would be wrong. It would be right, there would be a good, ethically good form of self-sacrifice if someone gives up their own happiness and someone does benefit, an individual, a group, society benefits. But that's not exactly self-sacrifice. It's really an example of trading the lower pleasure of self-gratification for the higher pleasure of helping someone else. So self-sacrifice doesn't contradict the greatest happiness principle. In fact, it confirms it. Then there's a fourth objection, that it's too complicated. It's too high a standard to expect someone to be able to calculate the global effects of their actions. And Mill's answer, I call this the get over yourself answer. Mill's answer is most of our actions don't have global consequences. And it's completely egotistical to think that they would, right? So we have to get over ourselves and understand that most of our actions only affect a few people around us. And so it's not too complicated to look around to the people around us and see how our actions are going to affect them. It's no more complicated than that most of the time to follow the GHP. And finally, there's the time objection. We don't have time to stand around and calculate the effects of our actions before doing them. It sounds quite plausible, but Mill says, look, we've had the entirety of human history, right? We, humanity, have had the entirety of human history to figure out what the consequences of most types of actions are. And that knowledge is communicated to us through various forms of culture, right? So not only do you learn about it in college, you also learn about it in fairy tales, right? People who are deceptive, people who lie to their friends, soon don't have any friends anymore. People who only think of money end up like King Midas, right? Who got his wish that everything he touched would turn to gold. He ended up turning his beloved daughter to gold, and then he reached out to eat some food, and his food turns to gold, right? So those are the 5 objections. And Mill, again, has defended the GHP, not in a linear fashion, but in the way that someone, a member of parliament, would defend it in debate by anticipating and answering objections.